All right, we are here at the University of Arkansas with Matt Hobbs, pitching coach here, standing in the beautiful pitching facility. First, just kind of intro the facility. How long has this been open, and give us a little bit of the behind the scenes of why it's so important for you guys.
So it opened in fall of 21 for us. This facility was built, the Hunt Player Development Center was built and finished in 21. When we started, the design of the building, like this was probably the room that I was definitely the most excited about, being the pitching coach, obviously. But a lot of thought went into this, a lot of work went into this. The engineers that built this building and created this building, it was really, whenever you build something or you think something's going to be built or you're in the planning processes, you always wonder, like, are we actually going to get what we asked for? And they went above and beyond to build this facility. So the Hunt family made a large donation to be able to give us an opportunity to have this building. And it's been operational for I think this is year 4 now in the building, and it continues to get better. It continues to grow and get better. We continue to add more things to it. We're super lucky with what we have in here, our technology that we do have in the building. You've got a Kinatrax system where we can run markerless motion capture. We have the Newt force mound where we can run force data, so we can really start at the ground and work all the way till the ball's out of the hand. And then we have a portable TrackMan unit that we can capture in here as well, so that we're getting the ball data to go with it. A couple Edgertronic cameras that we're able to use during bullpen sessions. So we're getting ball flight, we're getting ball data, we're getting data from the ground in terms of how guys are organizing themselves down the mound. We're getting kinematic data that we can match with the stuff that we have on the field. We also have a Kinatrax unit on our field. So there's just so many things that go into this building and go into our abilities to be able to coach our players better with a facility like this. It's really just player friendly more than anything. Instead of it just being a couple tunnels and some cameras, you've got training space. You've got a pre and post throw area, you've got a band wall, you've got plyo walls, you've got med ball walls, you've got ability to do, water bags or whatever the drills that we want to do with our guys. It really allows us to be able to train our guys at a high level.
So when you're talking about designing this place, for you, I'm sure you're a big piece in that. What were some of the most important things outside of just the training area when you looked at the design of this place and how it was going to be laid out? In your mind, what were kind of the most important things that you wanted this facility to have and how it was set up?
I felt like it needed to be functional for players. I think that the toughest thing to have players do is bring them into some sterile environment and say, this is where you're going to train. I wanted it to be theirs. I wanted them to be able to move freely throughout the building. I didn't want, on a day we were capturing something, that only a certain number of guys could be in the building and have it work. I wanted the capture to be something where we could have everybody in here. We could have the guys still training. If we're getting some kinematic data, that we don't have to stop everything and then only have a couple people in the building. I wanted this thing to be functional more than anything. Like, I just wanted good enough space that we could have our entire group in here training and getting after it. I love that environment, and I felt like that was one of the biggest necessities. And then functionality and getting a feedback loop that was tight for our players. Like, what's the best way to have a feedback loop that's tight? We have a video room that connects to our pitching development, the PDC, our pitching development center, and getting them actionable data that they can see while they're throwing their bullpens, whether it's mirroring the TrackMan unit up on the wall or giving them access to their kinematic data within 20-30 minutes after they throw a bullpen. Like, I think those things are really important. Feedback loops for players are incredibly important. Being able to access the units, being able to access their own information. We don't hide things from our players here, so I wanted them to have space to do that. They've got computers behind us over here. They've got the video room where they can grab all their data from either game or the things that we do capture in here. So I just really wanted this thing to be a functional space for the guys to train and a place where they felt like they were just training. I didn't want them to feel like they're coming in here to capture data. Like, I wanted them to feel like this is where I go train, I go pitch, I get ready to compete, and everything else that happens is happening in the background, is what I really wanted with this building.
Sure, and so talk about that feedback loop then. What's it look like? It starts with a bullpen and then it goes to video, and who's breaking down that information, and because it's almost like speaking some different languages, right? When you start talking about biomechanics and pitch movement and stuff like that, how does that kind of chain of communication work between you and the guys?
So we have a staff here that works with our pitchers, myself as the pitching coach. We have a director of analytics, DJ Baxendale, and we have a director of pitching, Zach Barr, that all work together to be able to grab all of this information and then get it to the players in something that's digestible. I've said this since I started coaching, and I firmly believe it. My job isn't to tell any pitcher how much I know about pitching. Like, that doesn't do us any good. It just gets everybody confused and gets me talking a lot. What we need to be able to do is take whatever we're grabbing that day, whether it's game data from a scrimmage or biomechanical data from our pitching development center in here, and then get it to the players in a way that makes sense to them. So while Kinatrax captures a million different things and can capture just about anything, there might only be one or two things that's important for a player. That's the information he needs. And then developing something around that information. If it's like we're working on, I don't know, if the guy needs more extension or something, there might be 5 or 6 different things that you could look at on a kinematic report that could say, this is influencing that. And then working backwards and saying, all right, well, here's a drill package that can affect those things. And then being able to continuously capture and saying, is anything we're doing working? So these players don't just get a bunch of stuff that we're just throwing a bunch of stuff to the wall and seeing what sticks. They get actionable data, and then actionable drills, and then actionable, hopefully, results. You know, hopefully the results are there and they speak to the things that we're trying to do and the work that we're trying to do. But after you throw a bullpen, you're going to get a report that gives you basically pitch movement, location in the zone, and then things that would correlate to, you know, what would happen out there. Are you throwing to the places that we've identified for soft contact? Are you throwing pitches that move in the way that we would need them to move to grab swings and misses? And that's all designed off of what happened in the game.
Right.
Like what had actually happened in the game. So if we're basically doing the exact same thing with a post-game report. We're looking at soft contact, we're looking at swings and misses, we're looking at ball movement, we're looking at how often they're able to access an arm side, 1 foot 1 plate side pitch for a strike. Like how often are we able to get that pitch? If we're able to get that pitch at 25 to 30% clip, we're winning the shadow zone, then we should try to work on throwing that pitch in the bullpen. Those types of things have to correlate with each other before you're giving anybody any information that's actually usable for any of the players. So I think that the main thing that we need to make sure that we're doing with our guys is giving them an opportunity to be able to train effectively.
Right. So then let's talk about kind of the belief and the buy-in to that, right? So now you're giving these guys actionable data. I have to imagine that helps them then when you're able to say, this is what you're struggling with. Okay, here's some ways to correct it. And then it's having all of this stuff has to speed up that process of then making that adjustment, which then in turn probably helps them kind of buy in and believe in the process and the systems. Correct?
Yeah, I think they have to be able to see it. Like
Right.
Players need to see it. You can't just tell them it's working. Like I've never wanted to be one of those pitching coaches that just patted you on the back and just told you like, hey, that was better. Like what does that even mean? Like they don't know what that means. And quite frankly, it's just something people say to just get on to the next thing in their lives sometimes. But you can show them like, hey, this is actually better. And really making sure that our guys can see it on the field. Like it doesn't matter until it works out there. Like none of this stuff, all this stuff is great and it helps us coach our players and it helps us with a lot of different things from a development perspective, but none of it matters until it works on the field. So showing them that yes, in fact, you did pick up 2 extra inches of extension and that led to a 15% raise in your swing and miss rate on fastballs that were 3'5" or better in the strike zone. It's just stuff like that matters.
Right.
Stuff like that matters to players. I've always believed that it doesn't matter where information comes from for players as long as it's good information, and they don't care where it's coming from as long as it works. And our job here is to make sure that we've created a system where they can see progress. They're not just doing stuff to do it just because we told them to. They can actually see, hey, this is actually getting me better. Okay, my bullpens are starting to look a little bit crisper. I'm starting to throw pitches where the coaches are talking about that I need to throw them. I'm able to make those pitches with more frequency. I'm able to use my stuff in a way that is going to elicit swings and misses on the field or soft contact or throw more strikes or whatever the guy's issue is, or throw it harder or throw it softer. And that does create instant buy-in. Right. You know, once they feel something that works and once they can see, okay, this actually is working, and we can show them over the course of, if it's like you're landing with your leg with too much extension and it was causing you to rotate off your fastball, it's making it harder for you to throw pitches to the glove side of the plate that don't cut. All right, well, you've picked up 14 degrees of flexion in your lead leg between September and October 15th. And that's led to a 5% raise in efficiency of your fastball according to TrackMan, and it's just like, and then they can start to see, all right, well, this is actually working. These things are working, and that's why Kinatrax is just amazing for us because it's like a library of the pitcher.
Right.
And you're not spending a whole bunch of time comparing them to like me comparing one of my freshman pitchers to Garrett Crochet. Doesn't make a ton of sense. They don't just because they're left-handed and they throw from the same slot doesn't mean you should be able to compare that freshman to himself.
Right.
You got to capture them a lot. You got to get a lot of information, and once it, I think that's the best comparison is you're comparing them to when did you show up versus where are you now, and that's the library of resources that we have in our facility allows us to be able to do that in a bunch of different ways. We can capture, like, your ball's moving differently. You were putting as much force into the ground at the top as you were when you were landing when you got here, and now you're putting 100 pounds over your body weight at the top, which is something that we would look for, and it's 200 pounds over your body weight into the bottom of the mound when you're landing now. And these things just start to become areas where you can show progress and be able to show movements and be able to show things that are moving in a positive direction for the players. And once they start to see that, yeah, they buy in and work hard. I mean, I think that if you're going to play at a place like this or a lot of the places you guys visit, you better be ready to work hard.
Right.
Like, you get swallowed up by this thing if you're not. I don't ever think that effort is going to be an issue for our players, but like getting real buy-in is something that I think that all this stuff helps with.
So, you make a great point because you keep referencing what happens out there. It's the most important thing, right? And this stuff is fantastic, but it's for training, right? And that's it. What do you think the biggest thing is tying this together to the game stuff? What's the biggest part of being able to look at the training and then tie it into outs on the field, right? Because, sometimes, and I don't know if your guys deal with this or not, but guys can get kind of clouded up there if they're constantly thinking about what the pitch is doing, what their body's doing, when you need them to get outs at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. I think that the thing you have to do as a coach in any of this environment where there's limitless technology out there for players to be able to access, it seems like all over the country, is make sure that there is a hard stop when they leave the bullpen. Like, this is no longer, that is not, like, these things they're doing the same thing, but they're not doing the same thing. And there has to be a structure for them to understand that once you leave the bullpen, what you've done is armor yourself with confidence. Like, that's the biggest thing that happens in here is you build up a suit of armor in this building of, I can make the ball do this when I need it to do this, and you can go out there and express that skill. And I feel like that's probably something that you have to do in coaching.
Right.
Like, that is coaching just the same as we're teaching somebody how to throw a curveball. Like, what we do in here is buy confidence. Like, you put in the work, you buy the confidence. You buy it in here, you buy it in the weight room, you buy it in the training room, you buy it when you're doing your sprints in the outfield, whatever you do to buy your confidence. And then be able to show a clear delineation between none of this matters anymore when you get out there. Only thing that matters out there is you versus the hitter. And that's as much of a coaching tool as like reading a biomechanics report with a pitcher. Like, you have to be able to do all of these things, especially if you're going to have all of these tools. Like, if we have all these tools and all I talk about is what we do in the PDC all the time, I should not expect my guys to be able to compete, because that's asking them to do, that's me making something more important than another. Like, I'll never make anything more important than what they have to do and what their job is to do here. They didn't come to Arkansas or anywhere else that you guys visit to train. They came to pitch. Like, they're pitchers. They're not robots. They're not video games. They're not some toy that we work with. These guys are pitchers, and they're competitors. And you let them loose on the field when you've armored them with confidence, they're animals. And it's like one of the great things that you get to watch is just a guy be able to go out there and just compete and not worry about any of this stuff. And I feel like if you don't do a good job being able to explain the differences between training and playing, you end up with a bunch of dudes that look really good in the bullpen. And then you lose a lot
Now about Kinatrax and what you love about it and what you like about it and why it's helped your guys so much. So just start there. What about Kinatrax do you find being the most helpful resource to your guys?
I think it goes back to some of the things we mentioned earlier, which is kind of like a library for the guys. But like, the first thing that we do when we bring anyone even to campus, like, they have to throw on the tech. Like it's a live assessment. Like I think that the main purpose for like grabbing as much information as we can early in their careers, whether it's, you know, a guy throwing a bullpen at the end of summer school or a guy throwing a bullpen on the first day that we can actually have them, like we can actually be with them in the fall, it's so that we can get a live assessment. I think you have table assessments, you'll look at internal, external rotation, shoulders and hips, and you'll do those things, and they're important, and that doesn't, like having Kinatrax doesn't mitigate the need for those things. But I can get, if I have a guy throw a 20 pitch bullpen, I just got 20 live assessments of how a guy's actually moving down the mound so that we can have an inside look at what do they do well, what can be some areas where we can help them, how can we tailor their pre-throw and their post-throw based on their movement qualities or lack of movement qualities, and then we can get with our strength coach. And he can sit down and we can start talking about exactly how are we going to do these things for this guy in the weight room. Because the last thing I ever want to do, and I used to see this 15 years ago when I was coaching, wherever I was 15 years ago, it's like you see a guy in the summer, you really like him, you know, you commit him, he signs with you, you get him on campus, he was 92 miles an hour, beautiful, and he had a good breaking ball, and you told the coaches about all these things this kid could do, and then he showed up on campus and he hit the weight room, and then he wasn't eating enough, and he lost some weight, and he goes out to his first fall outing, and he's throwing 87 miles an hour, and your head coach is looking at you like, I thought this guy was 90 to 93, and he is. Somewhere in there he is. But you just threw a whole bunch of load in terms of the weight room and the stress of school, and you didn't know about the movement, and you didn't have great information, and he just started pitching. And all of a sudden it's like, where did it all go? You know, you look at yourself and you start questioning yourself as a recruiter, but really it's there. You gave him too much too fast. So this way, when we have either our force mount or Kinatrax, we can see what's under the hood.
Right.
How is he moving? Is he able to hold strength in space? Like, does he have the ability to be able to move in space and be strong on the ground? Is his landing position, is it something that's efficient, that's going to hold rotation? Like, all of these things now we can look at, and Kinatrax certainly helps us with that, in addition to like blending it together with what goes on the ground, and you can get a clear picture of what's he ready for. Just because a guy's throwing 92 miles an hour in his first bullpen doesn't mean he's ready to do that out there consistently over time. And you see that stuff happen all the time around the country. It's like a guy shows up, everybody's excited about him, he doesn't pitch in the spring. What happened? Well, he probably did a ton of stuff when he got to campus because you're excited about him as a coach and you really want to like see this thing. You really want to like get your new guy in there and see him do all these things, and he's not ready. They're not strong enough. I look at like success stories we've had here. We had a kid named Jake Faraday here that threw 98 miles an hour as a freshman when he came into the building, and it was just, I mean, it was awesome. It was like electric stuff. But when he'd land, it would just be like all over the place. You just couldn't handle the force that he'd create and generate from how much rotational velocity he was creating. You just couldn't handle it. It wasn't strong. It took him 2 years to get strong. But if we just dumped a bunch of workload on him because he threw hard and we wanted to get him out there, we get this kid hurt, we get this kid to the point where he can't compete anymore. He goes in the 11th round last year with the Marlins. He's got a chance to be a big leaguer. Because you had to give him time, he had to get strong upstairs. I had to get our strength coach, Hunter Bell, he had to tell me, hey, this kid's ready. This kid has the requisite ability to land now and hold his rotation and keep his head close to the target and be able to rotate through a pitch and be able to get a sinker to stay on line. He has the ability now to do this in terms of strength, and you can measure that based on how he's able to land consistently over time and what's happening with his deflection and extension of his lead and how fast that's going. You can look at a bunch of different stuff. And I'm just mentioning a bunch of different movements that we can be able to capture that like, Kinatrax helps us with, and it's just one success story, but you go from a kid that probably ends up never pitching to a kid that goes in the 11th round. And I realize that's not the first round draft pick story that everybody wants to hear, but to me it's just success. It's just a success story that we use this tech and we use like the ability to be able to have these things talk to each other and then have our strength coach be able to get involved. I think that's probably the most important thing that you can get is you try to mitigate the amount of mistakes that are made early in a player's career based on expecting them to do things their body's just not physically ready for. I can't get angry at a player if I'm asking him to throw glove side fastballs, but he can't handle the rotation he creates to get there. So he's not going to keep that pitch on the plate. It's going to leak back to the middle of the plate. It's going to get yanked in the other batter's box, and you have to, like, if I'm just sitting there getting mad at a kid about that, I'm not utilizing the tools I have here. I have to have enough sense to be able to look at some of these things and look at my player and say, am I expecting too much for physically where he's at? And I feel like if you have a bunch of information, you're able to talk to the strength and conditioning department, you're able to talk to your trainer, you're able to look globally at a pitcher, you can make better decisions early in the career, and their career path can now be different.
So that takes a lot of work, and Kinatrax has obviously helped simplify that. Walk us through what we're seeing here, the kinematic sequence, and what you're kind of looking at and looking for, and everybody moves differently, right? So I would imagine that Kinatrax then helps you understand how each of your guys moves and what's optimal for them individually.
I think that the biggest thing you said is that everybody's a little bit different. So this kinematic sequence for this pitcher is going to be different than a kinematic sequence for another pitcher. What we're looking at here is just like how is velocity being handed off segment to segment until the ball's released, and how fast, like I think the last thing you're going to get is how fast their hand is moving. And that's ultimately the goal for these things, is like, how do we produce this guy to move faster, better, more efficiently down the mound? So just like one thing that it's showing us is just kinematic sequencing. And it's just, for me, it's just the ability to look at, all right, when velocity is being handed off from segment to segment, how is it moving together? Like, how many milliseconds does it take to go from max pelvis to max trunk? Like, you can start to look at things like that, and then you're relating it to the player instead of just relating it to what you think other guys should look like. And I think that that's a real key with anytime you're looking at kinematic data from any players. Is it's like when you have enough captures and you have enough information, then you can start making some decisions. But the most dangerous thing you could do with a system like this, have a guy throw one bullpen, then start making a bunch of sweeping changes. It's like, that's crazy. Like, you need to capture. You need, like, we have a general rule here that it's 50 pitches before we ever do anything with anybody. Like, that's a general place where if we take 50 pitches is about roughly in their first, from the first entrance bullpen they throw, 50 pitches is like the third pen. So you get through 3 bullpens, you've captured a bunch of pitches. Some of those might take place out on the field. Hopefully they do, because you can see some kinematic differences from game mound to bullpen mound. And I think that that's when you can start, like, not necessarily making changes, but making better decisions. So I think that, like, you have to make sure that you've captured enough. Like, you don't have to one capture and then, like, let's go make a bunch of changes. That's not something we would do here. And I know that I know sometimes it's like, you know, somebody goes to a facility, they throw on the tech, they get the report, and they're going to go make all these changes. There's a lot of things that can happen. There's a lot of things that can happen. It's like, when we look at the way that we're going to use technology in our space, I feel this way about players, is if I bring in 6 pitchers a year, or wherever we bring in, 6 pitchers have sacrificed something to come here, whether it's opportunities at another school or money in the draft. They've sacrificed something to come here. We owe it to them to make good decisions. We're not perfect, nobody is, but we don't want to make sweeping changes just because of something that I feel when I see a guy throw. Like, my gut isn't smart enough. My gut's not smart enough. Like, I need a bunch of more information before we can make any, like, good decisions about players. So I think, Kinatrax looks at a lot of different things. There's so many. We could spend 5 hours looking at these reports. Kinematic sequencing, I think, is important because it becomes a signature of how a player moves. It's like on the ground, like with the Newt force mound, it's like force signatures. Like, how do they move down the mound? What's his force signature? How do you then be able to adapt that to, like, a medicine ball throw or something, where you can start to look at different training modules for guys? So I feel like our systems give us an opportunity to be able to look deeper into whether it's ways that we train them, or, you know, what we can expect from them, or the signature of how they move.
So you talked in there about, you know, the kinematic sequence and seeing the velocity transfer. Okay, 2 questions off of that is there key things that you see in every guy that throws hard as far as how quickly they're moving from start to finish? And then with that, kind of a buzzword I feel like you hear a lot about now is stopping, right? And being able to stop. How important of a key is that then at the end of that sequence to then stop to be able to produce the velocity of the actual baseball going forward?
Yeah, I think that the stopping is, and I think it was bracing for a while, then it was lead leg blocking, and it's been called a bunch of different stuff. It's just controlled falling.
Right.
Right? It's just stopping. I think that that's probably one of the most important things is how a guy can come to a halt and how they can begin to be able to handle rotation. We like guys to move fast through the middle. Trunk rotational velocity is something that we would look at. Pelvic rotational velocity and how it hands off to the trunk is something we would look at. Those things I think can influence velocity. Things that have to go with that is efficient movement of their arm. Like if my trunk's moving really fast, and my pelvis is moving really fast, and my trunk's moving really fast, and my arm is long and getting trapped behind my body, it's just going to be hard to make that thing whip through the zone and throw strikes the way that you'd need it to. Throwing hard is great. Throwing strikes is better. Throwing hard strikes is best. And being able to handle the rotation that you create when you are creating like a massive amount of force through the middle of your body, you have to have something that slows that down and stops it. So when you're looking at stopping, for example, it's like you want to make sure that you're evaluating once the pelvis has rotated. So you don't want to just evaluate like how hard they hit the ground. Like if I'm just working at vertical force into the ground, I want to make sure I'm looking at my vertical force into the ground after the pelvis is rotated. That's weight bearing.
Right.
Like the other stuff is just hitting the ground hard and doesn't really, it shows a big number and guys get excited about that, but like how functional is that number, and then how fast can that force return back into the body to pitch them forward to potentially like get more extension. Like these things are all really, really important to us, and stopping is, you know, like you said buzzword, and it is. It's just like people have been calling it a bunch of different stuff for a long time, and it's just like, is it important, is it not important? There's nothing on this mound that's not important.
Right.
Like I think people said it doesn't matter what you do over the rubber. Yeah, it does. Well, it doesn't matter what you do from like once your foot hits the ground, everything, you know, yes, it does. Like it doesn't matter if you throw quality strikes as long as they're hard. It matters if you do that. Like everything that they do on the mound matters to me. Like if a guy is going to create a ton of force by leaving the rubber super early and pitching his hip out towards home plate and losing the center of his delivery and his integrity down the mound for the sake of moving faster, I'd rather him move slower and be able to control these movements as they go. What I would really rather they do is become really powerful in the weight room first. And we don't always have that luxury. But those things like stopping and being able to handle rotation happens up in the weight room. Like as much as I like to think everything is revolved around some drill, it is not. Being strong and then being strong functionally are the most important things a pitcher can have. The best velocity program I've ever seen is getting really strong and growing up. Still, like I think that you can do other things to be able to influence these numbers, but the best programming I've ever seen is being strong enough to stop and rotate. And there's a million different ways to stop and rotate. Like the things that we want guys to do is when they hit the ground, hit with a midfoot strike the best they can, work from the big toe out to the pinky toe in terms of shear force over the rubber that we can monitor with the newt force, and then be able to handle rotation so that when they do stop, they can almost have like a recoil effect. Like we want guys to be able to do that so that they can stop on one leg. So you have to train on one leg in the weight room. Like a 500-pound back squat isn't that impressive to me. Like a split squat at 550 pounds is impressive to me.
Right.
Like training on one leg. We play in a one-leg sport. They're very rarely on two legs. They very rarely are. And they have to be able to transfer force from one leg to the other and be able to handle those movements. So like throwing medicine balls, ballistically, whether it's up or downhill. Like these things are huge, huge training tools if if the guy's having trouble stopping or if the guy's having trouble moving hard through the middle. Like not just going out and playing long toss is gonna fix these things. Like it's a tool, like anything else in here, they're just tools, but being able to manage the middle of your delivery, create rotational velocity, and then create an ability to, once you hit the ground, rotate and then be able to pitch yourself forward while you're returning force back into your body is a hugely important thing. And I don't know how to measure those things other than using force plates.
Right.
Like I feel like, again, this isn't the only thing that we use, but it certainly is something that helps.
Sure. So you talk about getting guys stronger. You talk about how they have to be able to, you know, we've talked about moving optimally. When guys are going through that process, because a lot of guys, when you first get them, they're 18 years old, right? And you said they need to grow up. How much have you seen then that their body when their body changes, how they move changes, and then how do you then continue? Do you have to continually make adjustments on the mound because, hey, now they might rotate differently because they've gotten bigger and stronger and they're just growing up and now their whole movement profile changes?
Yeah, I mean, you don't usually see like huge drastic changes, but you will see stuff within the movement profile that is different that you now have to account for.
Okay.
Like what a guy might be able to do is if he has to fly open to get himself out front, like he had to do that because he was weak. And now he strides slightly across his body. So the positioning in relationship to the rubber might change in terms of like now he has to stand on this side of the rubber versus this side of the rubber. Those things can start to change. And we see it all the time. Like you get a freshman, for whatever reason, they all throw from their glove side of the rubber. I don't know why, but most of them do. It's like they all throw from the glove side of the rubber. They all kind of fly open. They all have massive hip-shoulder separation because that's what's trained. Like if I have hip-shoulder separation, I'll throw harder is kind of like, I think a lot of people think that. And we have to get those things back under control. Like massive amounts of hip-shoulder separation, I guess, are helpful, but being able to control them, then move fast within small spaces on the mound is the most important thing. And so you have to clean some direction usually, and some of that is cleaned by just moving them over somewhere on the rubber. I mean, I think that that's like a cheat code for a lot of guys is like just move to the same sidedness of the hitter on the rubber and you've got, like you create more angle and depth on your pitches without changing them a whole lot.
Right.
But those movements will, like when guys do get stronger and guys do get older and they do like start to move a little bit differently down the mound, you have to account for that stuff all the time because it's going to change how the pitches move. And that's one thing that I feel like you have to do a good job of if you're going to have all this stuff is really make sure you're evaluating pitch movement all the time. You have to evaluate how the pitches are moving. Like there shouldn't be drastic sweeping changes in pitch movement profiles. And if there is, it's probably like movement influences metrics. That's always been the way that it is. So you really have to be able to hone in on the things that like are going to show up every day, which is like how do the pitches move? Like you might not feel great or might not feel like you're as explosive off the mound, but your pitches should move the same. And as soon as they don't, that's when you have to really go back in and say, all right, this kid is 6 months older. He's 15 pounds heavier. He's developed a ton more force into the ground and like his force signature is a little bit different at the top. He's landing about the same, but he's landing a little bit harder now. Like what's happening to the pitches? And then you have to start looking back through these things, right? Like what adjustments can we help this player make so that he's able to utilize these new tools that he's gained in the weight room? The new functional strength that he's created, or honestly, like did he get super stiff up there? Right. And now he's not moving as loose. And like, all right, well now we have to account for that. So I think that you're always constantly doing that stuff. It's again, like when I say stuff like, you know, it's constant evaluation and it's constant, it really is. It never really changes. And there's just massive assessment. Like if I have, our Friday guy throws 100 pitches out there, I have 100 assessments. Like it's a huge, huge, huge win for me as a pitching coach because it just gives me a lot of information. So yes, to answer your question, like you absolutely have, it's malpractice if you're not looking at those things.
Right. Last thing before we get you out of here, what do you see in high school guys or young guys when they come in, what is the biggest area of growth that they need to have and when you first get them on campus? Is there a common thing that you see a lot of the times?
It's, I mean, I'd say 90% of the time it's strength.
Strength, yeah.
Strength is 90% of the battle with these kids because I feel like there's a lot of really good places to train at the high school level, and there's a lot of people that do a great job at the high school level. There's a lot of really good high school coaches. They're just limited in what they have, the resources.
Right.
They just don't have enough. Like they don't have this building, and that's not their fault. It doesn't mean they're not good coaches. It's just they don't have the resources, and they don't have 15 other pitchers that are on a mission to pitch in the big leagues. And once you start getting your environment right, when you go train upstairs, you go train in our weight room, it's different than when you trained at Gold's Gym. Mm-hmm. It's just different. Doesn't mean you weren't working hard. It just means it's a different level you have to be able to rise to. It's like the first time a freshman comes in here and throws a bullpen and he sees Gabe Gackle going 96, 98, and he's like, oh, I'm competing against that guy for innings. It's not just the guy I watched on TV anymore. Mm-hmm. Like now I'm competing against him. Like last year when Hagan was throwing his first couple bullpens, there's 20 pitchers down here watching him. He's throwing 100 miles an hour in here, and it's just like, this is now real to me. Like if I want to pitch, I have to do things like this guy's doing it. I don't have to be this guy, but that guy's going to go grab 90 innings or 100 innings. And there's about 600 innings on a team that goes to Omaha, so there's 500 left to get. But the guy that went before him was 94 to 97. And the guy that went after me was a sidearm lefty that throws 88 to 92 with like sick movement. And now all of a sudden you should start, if you're a freshman, you start adding this stuff up in your head. You're like, I better raise my game significantly. And I think that they're not strong enough when they get here. Most of the time, some are. They're super talented. Like our freshmen that we bring in every year, and this is a lot of just good programs, you look around, you're like, well, he's more talented than that guy, but that guy's definitely going to pitch instead of him because he knows what he's doing.
Right.
And they just have to like grow up a little bit. They got to go get their nose bloodied out there. I mean, they got to go out and give up some home runs and miss down the middle and have it matter. And they got to throw the pitch that their friends oohed and awed over in high school and have it get hit off our building before they're ready to pitch. Like I see that all the time. It's like that 90, and I was saying this to a group of freshmen, gave a bunch of home runs in an inter-squad game earlier this year. I was like, I bet at whatever high school you were at, they didn't hit that pitch that way. And he looked back, he's like, no, sir, they didn't, but they do now. And now that kid's ready. Right. He's now armored. He's calloused. He's getting calloused to college baseball. It's like, that's how you have to be able to do these things if you're a younger pitcher. It's going to happen. It's okay. Like their talent level is sometimes supersedes anything we have in our building. They're probably some of the most talented kids, the younger players we bring in. They're not strong enough yet. They haven't gone through the SEC yet. They haven't had to do any of these things yet. They haven't had the pitch everybody loved in high school get hammered yet. And once they have, they grow up pretty quick. So your job as a coach is to prepare them for the inevitability. You got to prepare them for the inevitability. It's going to happen. And like Gabe Gackle, who I just talked about, throwing 96, 98 in a bullpen here the other day, which he was, his freshman year, his whip was 2.14. He gave up 50% hard contact. He walked 6.5 per 9. He struck out 8.5 per 9. This is his freshman fall. This is a freshman All-American, probably one of the best 2 or 3 freshman pitchers in the country last year. That happened to him in the fall of his freshman year. It's a great lesson.
Right.
He did not perform well the fall of his freshman year. He was sideways for the majority of the fall of his freshman year. And what you have to keep saying as a coach, once you know the person and you believe that the makeup is going to be able to help you, and then you know the stuff and you've evaluated that enough and you've been able to look at the movement, how he uses the ground, all of it, you've encompassed the player. I know what good looks like. And that's where you have to be their experience a little bit. Like I heard Brent Kimnant say that. He was a Wichita State pitching coach for a number of years, one of the best pitching coaches to ever coach in college baseball. He's like, your job is to be their experience. And those freshmen, that's your job. Your job's to be their experience. Like I've seen good. I know what good looks like. It's not going great right now. You're having a terrible fall. You don't know which way's up. This is going to be okay. And that kid comes back and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can get these guys out now. Like I've had all that happen to me before. So I think that like there's so many things that go into what it means to be a good player young in your career. Our job as coaches is to evaluate, like I said, evaluate the whole picture, like what's going on, how can we help them be successful, and make sure that we are constantly looking at like these things, like the force mound, Kinatrax, TrackMan, because what they're doing is trying to survive right, most of the time. And me going and sitting down and being like, well, you've actually picked up 4 degrees of external work. There's too much going on. They need me to do that in the background. They need me to be able to coach them with the tools. Like we're coaching with this stuff every day. Our players don't know that. Like that's the art of this thing. Like anytime they want the information, it's certainly there for them to look at, but I coach with this stuff daily, so does the rest of our staff. This is how we train our players. They have no idea that's going on. They're just throwing their bullpen and competing.
Well, Coach Hobbs, thank you so much for taking the time and doing this. This has been awesome, and I'm sure the viewers will enjoy it.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having us.